when this all unfolds. Food. People are going to have to be able to eat, and it will not be there. And a great new way to get your food storage there's a great new way to get it for free. And Free Foods to Go is our sponsor for the next hour. Free Foods to Go is a co-op of like-minded people who want to get as much food and preparedness items into as many homes as quickly as possible. And the larger the co-op becomes, the larger and better the discounts. So by joining with Free Foods to Go and referring others to the co-op, you'll be rewarded with more free food and cash each month. Many other preparedness items and training will be available. You can become a co-op customer for free, and you can also become a co-op associate or co-op owner for those wishing to earn free food and cash each month. The mission is to help 1 million people getting their free food storage as quickly as possible. The belief is that food is the true wealth and security of the future, and in these uncertain and chaotic times, what's more important than having food reserves and preparedness items? So if you want to find out more about that, I want you to visit, it's http Steve's STEVES-biz.com. That's Steves-biz.com. And anybody in the chat room that knows Stevie65, that's his website. So you go there and join up with Stevie. He's got a very reputable business thing going here, and hopefully we can get as many people prepared as possible in a very short period of time. And we really do have a short period of time. Isn't that right, John?
Yes, we do. And we'll be discussing that a little later in Mike King's Court as there's some more John King predictions that I said were going to happen come true again in the last few days, as you know, Joe.
Yep. No, very, very true. Very true. So how do we go about, or how does somebody go about taking this up in the court system? How do states draw the line in the sand, Margot? How do they do it?
Well, I think you're seeing some of that go on right now. For instance, you're seeing some efforts, for example, with the Attorney General's bringing suit against the implication of the health care bill. You're seeing the state of Arizona sue the federal government over failure to enforce immigration laws. There are some means. You're also seeing some state legislatures pass resolutions or introduce constitutional amendments that would block federal laws that the state feels are unconstitutional, in the sense that the state would say, well, we are choosing not to implement certain laws that we feel would jeopardize our sovereignty or would be, oppressive for us to try to implement or execute or administrate on a state level, whether it be financially or otherwise. So we're seeing some of that, but the problem is that we have an administration that's currently in office that has a priority problem. And I'm not trying to politicize this issue because I don't believe it's a political issue. I believe it's actually bigger and more problematic than that. But as a systematic failure in Washington on the federal level, I think that we're having some real problems with trying to figure out what our priorities as a nation would be. And it's turning out that states and the people are generally at odds with the policies and the direction that the elites, which I kind of hesitate to call them elites because they're I don't feel like they're elite type of human beings at all, but for sake of simplicity, we'll call them the elites. Mm-hmm. Are trying. They have different motives and different agendas than the rest of the country seems to have. So, that's kind of the problem here. And I think that there is an intention to destroy the sovereignty of the states. And, people don't realize that the destruction of individual sovereignty occurred a long time ago. The one barrier to a lot of the agendas that are going on right now, the last barrier seems to be tearing down the sovereignty of the states so that the sovereignty of the country will be easier to break down so that they can do whatever they need to do to try to do a trans-American union or a global government of some kind. But, and you know, you can see this in the legal profession. It's just most of the people in the profession take a blind eye to it, or they reject that notion because it's just such a horrendous thing to try to believe.
It is. It's absolutely insane. And, folks, anybody that wants to chime in on this, the number to call is 877-598-8549. That's 877-598-8549. Let's go to the phones. I've got Tom in Georgia. Tom, you're live on the air. Go ahead.
Hey, guys. Margot, you and I have exchanged emails. It's very nice to talk to you over the phone. And
yes.
Hey to Griff.
Hello, Tom.
I don't mean to throw water on this thing, but the 10th Amendment was killed in April of 1865. As a matter of fact, most of the Constitution was killed when the South lost the Civil War. That was a battle over the Constitution, and the Constitution lost. We've had a lot of decisions since then that were, quote-unquote, based on the Constitution, but that's just lip service, because when they decide to make a ruling against the Constitution, they come up with another reason and just they forego the Constitution. So I don't know if the 10th Amendment is a valid argument. You know, Margot, I'm not trying to argue with you. If I had a constitutional amendment issue to take to the courts, I would certainly hire you as my attorney. But I just think in reality, the courts don't recognize it anymore.
And, Tom, I would say for the most part that you're absolutely right. I do think that the 10th Amendment, as well as a lot of other amendments, were rendered irrelevant by the 14th Amendment. And for those who are unfamiliar with the more subtle effects of the 14th Amendment, that amendment actually created federal citizenship. And prior to the enactment of the 14th Amendment, we actually had no such thing as federal citizenship. People were citizens solely of the states that they resided in. And states actually had a lot of control over citizenship. So caller is right that once the 14th Amendment was enacted, we did have a really big problem with the effectiveness of some of the amendments, especially the 10th Amendment, simply due to the perception that the 14th Amendment totally created a federal superiority in a way that really did do a whole lot of damage to individual and state sovereignty.
Well, you look at the recent Supreme Court case when the bailout started and the government took over GMAC. That was brought before the Supreme Court, and I thought, well, my gosh, they've got to blow this out of the water because the Constitution doesn't give the government authority to take over private or public corporations. But they didn't even look at that issue. They said, well, you know, the bondholders, their agents represented them, so your beef is actually you, the bondholders. Your beef is actually with the agent rather than the takeover, and they just bypass the issue of whether or not the government have the right to do this. So when they want to, they overlook the Constitution.
Oh, sure. They do it all the time. For instance, and I've said this before, in 16th Amendment cases, they will totally overlook the overwhelming evidence that the amendment was never ratified. And as far as the 14th Amendment goes, there are actual court cases that say that the 14th Amendment was never properly ratified, and yet courts go ahead and ignore that one as well, too. So, yeah, they tend to do what's convenient for them in the expansion of federal power, absolutely.
That's right.
It's a fantastic argument for sure, but the problem, like you guys say, that I'm running into and understand, well, I understand, is that the courts will not recognize the law or the way the law is supposed to be interpreted. Am I right in understanding it that way?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's as I've said before, there is a breakdown in the rule of law in a nation where there are certain people at the top of the political strata who make the laws, And then those laws are applicable to everybody but the people who make them. And the people that are supposed to apply and adjudicate the law tend not to do it in a manner that is conducive to upholding the Constitution, because they have personal motivations that they are looking out for above and beyond the oath of office that they took. For instance, for a federal judge to overrule and say that the 16th Amendment was not properly ratified and therefore is inapplicable would fly in the face of every single precedent we have in the last 50 years in this country as far as tax law is concerned, and would throw the entire system into pandemonium, and that judge's reputation would be ruined, and he would be out of a job, he would be ridiculed, and for those reasons, judges cling to personal motivation in a lot of cases, and their rationale has been accepted as reasonable because it is what is conventionally accepted. They have stuck to the norm. You know, for instance, I'll give you an example here. One of the problems with Roe v. Wade, whether or not you're pro-choice or pro-life, is the fact that the court in Roe v. Wade justified a woman's right to choose by reading in some ethereal implied right to privacy in the Fifth Amendment, okay? They could have just as easily gotten to the same conclusion had they used the 10th Amendment. And they probably would have done it more directly, and they would have had an easier time doing that. But instead, they choose to bend and contort the law to suit whatever they go through this almost intellectual acrobatics in these 40-page and 90-page opinions to try to justify the political outcome that they deem necessary for whatever their motivation is.
It's a very interesting thing. Now, I've heard the argument that the type of law that we're under right now is maritime law or admiralty law, that the courts are admiralty courts and that's what we're under. However, I kind of look at it as this, and I don't know, tell me if I'm off base. I kind of feel like we're in anarchy because the law only applies to the commoners while the quote-unquote elitists get away with murder. And in order for there to be a rule of law, it has to apply to everybody from the top down. Isn't that right?
That is right. There's no uniformity in the application of the rule of law in this country anymore. And I would actually argue that we are a lot closer to being a kleptocracy than we are a democracy. And when I say a kleptocracy, I essentially mean it's a government that steals and exploits the very people that support it. And that's what we've devolved into in this country.
Can I jump in?
By all means, Tom, go ahead.
I concur completely with what Margot says. It's money talks and OJ walks. And those judges who do try to adhere to the Constitution, I'm concerned that they get the treatment that the good Judge Rawl got out in Arizona, who I'm not sure was not the ultimate target of that mass shooting. He was the judge who was involved with Mack versus USA, Sheriff Mack's case against the USA, and he had also made some preliminary rulings against Obamacare that lended itself towards the 10th Amendment, and I'm not sure that he wasn't taken out because of that. That's speculation, but nobody's talking about that, and it seems odd that they would just let his death go by unnoticed and got him out of the way.
Yeah, the press has certainly sorely neglected their duty in holding these elected officials accountable and these elitists accountable, these corporations accountable. So it's very interesting to see how our society in the United States is really, really degrading and rapidly. Tom, don't go away. I want to continue the conversation with you after the break. You guys are listening to Freedomlink Radio on the Intel Hub News Network. Don't go away. We'll be right back.